You ready? All right. So this is the second Lenten session this year, and picking up on a little bit of my lack of clarity and confusion about it, and it seemed like a meeting between Saint Benedict and Yogi Berra. Okay, you know Yogi Berra, the baseball player. Saint Benedict said, "We begin always, we begin again." And so we're starting again. And then Yogi Berra said, "Seems like deja vu all over again." And that's where we are. So the lack of clarity was something we were dealing with in the first session. Last year, the topic was dance, a whole dance. And somewhere after that first session, Diana says, it was hard to decide what's a metaphor and what's not. And I think it's kind of the same way with the desert. These were literal people, alive historical figures who were the desert fathers and mothers. A couple of centuries after Jesus, the extension of the New Testament church established by the apostles that were going through a lot of persecution. These are real people that went to the desert, not to avoid or for safety, not to avoid the danger. And actually, there were massacres in the desert a couple of times. But the point was to dispel all of their earthly desires, to get rid of them, let them fall away, to have purity of heart so that they can see God. So that part is literal. Do we have to go to the desert? Are we trying to sign up a field trip, to go somewhere to the desert? I mean, I got plans to go to the desert after Easter, but not necessarily when I, that's not the point. So it's a metaphor for us. And the desert we're going to, as I talked about on the live stream this morning, is an inward desert. It's an inward journey into the deepest closets of ourselves where there's all kinds of clutter. And when we get that door open, we find out it's not just the stuff that's getting caught in the door. It just got to go all the way back in the corner. But when we get to the corner, get out all the junk that's accumulated in our spring cleaning, we get down and we find our truest self, who we really are. It's been buried under all that. And we also find in our deepest inner being and core of who we are, we'll find the essence of God. And that's why the pure in heart shall see God. You get all that junk out, and God's buried there in the back of your closet. Okay. So, is it a metaphor? Yes and no. It depends on what you need and which is hard, which is the hardest for you. If you can go to the desert, and we'll get to the part about the monks in the world as the final session. They said things like, and they called where they're dwelling, they called the cell. Okay. And they said you can spend 100 years in a cell and not know how to be in your cell. Or you can live in the city and in the right frame of mind, be in your cell in the middle of all the people. So it's a metaphor and it's not a metaphor. Whichever is the hardest one for you, that's probably the one you need. And the going inside yourself is definitely the hardest, unless we go to really rough it, like they did with a basket of bread a year, or sitting with a stone in your mouth for a year so you learn to be silent. That can be the hard part. Anyway, so tonight we're talking about desert spirituality and kind of the elements that go with it. Okay. The great themes of the sayings of the desert is salvation, or encountering and seeing God. When the fathers met one another, their greeting was sothesis, which means may you be saved. Okay, that was their greeting. Not may I be saved, but may you be saved. May I speak a word in my whole agenda is you'll be saved. That's a little bit weightier than good afternoon, isn't it? It's a little bit weightier, and it shows that they weren't there for themselves, for their own edification, or to prove what they could do. They were there, in essence, for the salvation of others. That was the primary thing. So they traveled together in a way of salvation that began with this flight from the world. Monastic life is a work of God. This is a quote from Thomas Merton, more modern. He died in the 70s, 60s or 70s, I think, but 1960s or 70s. Monastic life is the work of God having three divisions: solitude, work, and prayer. Maybe picture a monastery. They usually do something, either keep bees or tend cattle or, something, make baskets, whatever it is. They have something that they do for the community work to earn a meager living. So work is an important part of it, and it'll be included in one of our virtues. Solitude, work, and prayer. And their aim was peace, liberty of spirit, purity of heart, and freedom from all desires, living with God alone. Okay? Why the desert? What is it about the desert, you think, Carol?
Nobody else is there.
It's isolated, for sure.
It's kind of like a lack of all things.
Right. There's nothing there. Not only no people, there's a lack of food, lack of water, certainly a lack of comfort. The word for desert in Greek is eremos, which means abandonment. It's a term from which we derive the word hermit. So you can see the whole solitary image of it. Desert was a place to come face to face with loneliness, and for the monks, death. I think we pointed this out on Ash Wednesday when we talk about mortality, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. So the Evagrius said, sit in your cell, collecting your thoughts, remembering the day of your death, thinking about death every day. And he also said, number 4, he also said, always keep your death in mind and do not forget the eternal judgment. Then there will be no fault in your soul. So they wanted to think about that, and in fact, saw themselves and pictured themselves as having died when they went to the desert. That was how removed they were from comforts and desires. In the desert, you face, forced to face up to yourself and the temptations in life that distract you from a wide-hearted focus on the presence of the sacred in the world. The desert is a place of deep encounter, not a place of superficial escape. I'd be going for a vacation. That's not why they were there. Rest and relaxation. It is a place that strips you down to the essentials, forcing you to let go of all the securities you cling to in life, even your images of God. The desert leaves you feeling alone, mortal, and very limited. It is through the fierceness of this very experience that the desert elders saw a doorway to encounter with God. It is much more expansive than anything they imagined. Does that make sense? It's hard to identify with it because we haven't experienced that kind of focus ever, really. You can think about maybe when you, maybe Jeff, when you're fishing and you just forget everything that's around you because you're intent on what you're doing. Maybe. No. No.
There's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. It just, there's one saying where they forgot to eat. They just forgot. They weren't fasting, they just forgot. It's like me forgetting to come to the Lenten study. Just daydreaming. So that's kind of the singleness of focus. That's really, yeah, you can't identify with them. Really, I can't, because it's not something that we experience. So yeah, it is hard to get your mind wrapped around what they were doing. But then think about doing it not literally, but metaphorically, just delving into yourself and trying to have that focus, approaching, um, your prayer or devotion or your contemplative prayer with that kind of singular focus, or even just trying to live life with that singular focus. It's difficult to imagine. So I get why it's kind of hard to identify with or imagine. So still talking about desert, Belden Lane says the desert imagination thrives on the absence of what others consider essential. So you're feasting on that. You're finding all kinds of things to think about that from the lack of what others think is essential. Such a place was perfect for entering into the vulnerability necessary for meeting the divine. This cuts to the heart of what came to be known as the Pothic spirituality, or the way of negation, we talked about Sunday. The term derives from apart from and speech. Basically, when you encounter God and the mystery of God, it's beyond words. So that was what they were having, and yeah, maybe why they said in silence. You ever see something that leaves you speechless? Whether it's a baby or a sunset or maybe snow in the morning. So the beauty of something leaves you speechless, and that's what they found in this way of living, a way of negation. They found God to be beyond words. So they sat there in silence and awe. Okay, Gregory of Nicaea lived from 335 to 395 AD, and was supreme theologian of desire, one of the first great Christian mystical writers. And so three themes emerge central to Gregory's thought: the incomprehensible wonder of God, that beyond words, the never-ending quality of desire that provokes. So when you see something like that, you'll travel miles to see another sunset, or get up early to see the sunrise. You desire it because of the beauty, and because you can't speak words, you're just fascinated with it, and you have to see more of it. So that's the second thing: the incomprehensibility of God, the wonder of God, the never-ending quality, the desire that it provokes, and the nature of the spiritual journey that it entails. What it takes for you to get up and see the sunrise, for what it takes for you to see the awesomeness of God, wherever it is. So it's that journey to get there. So yeah, you get up early for your hobbies and for work to make your living and go to your jobs, but what about the journey to encounter God's presence that leaves you speechless? So these three truths: the divine mystery of God, always more than we can describe; the endless desire, God is ultimately beyond knowing, but not beyond desiring. God is beyond knowing. Can't really get a handle on God. But God is not beyond desiring. Longing is the heart's most natural path to God. And then the third point he made was a spiritual life is journey. And there's a difference between a tourist. Tourist is going to escape accountability, like I'm going to do in the desert after Easter. It's going to go and escape accountability, walk around squinting into fold-out maps or your phone to find your destination on GPS. But a journey, on the other hand, so I'll be trying to duplicate the experiences those who have gone before me, seeing what they saw and told me I should see. Okay, it's a tourist. But a journey involves risk. You trudge ahead without knowing where you're going or any guarantees of where you're finally going to end up, or if you're going to get there. That's the journey. So walking then is a virtue. It commits to a trail. And tourism is said to be a deadly sin. Just walking around trying to have the experiences everybody else has. So which one of those is church?
Say them again.
Tour, just going around trying to follow the maps,
Okay.
trying to do what everybody's done before, and they telling you what you should be doing in confirmation class, and when to stand up in the bulletin, and when to sit down, and what prayers to say at what times. Or is it more about exploring without knowing what you're going to find and asking questions you don't already know the answer to?
Combination.
Yeah, probably.
Kind of up to the person.
It might be different every time. Like you may really need the consistency this Sunday, but next Sunday you might need the other.
And sometimes you might need to give instead of receive, or receive instead of give knowledge or information. Or, people might ask you questions, and then next week you got to ask the questions.
Yeah.
Be willing to receive as well as.
One of the truths of journeying is the farther you go, the fewer tracks there are. We hiked in the Shawnee Mission Park Saturday, and it was like a figure-8 loop, and there's this little loop off to the side that you can do or not do, because there was a crossing there. You can go any one 4 ways. And we thought we wanted to stay longer, so we'll do that little loop. Well, we found out why nobody did that loop. It was very rough and not much to see. And we saw people all along the big loop, all the way. We didn't see a single soul walking out there on that little loop. And that's the way it is with a journey. The farther you go into the unknown territory, the fewer signs there are and less traffic. Find yourself more alone. And basically, that's what happened in the desert. When they went to those extremes of living. Yeah, like we said last week, there were thousands of people living in these hermit villages, living in the cities in the desert, but not anything compared to the cities that they left, the populations that they left. So we're going to talk about this journey a little bit. And when we think, we're on a journey, and it's not always easy to be disciplined in our faith or do Lenten disciplines or whatever. It's been divided into, Gregory of Nicaea divided the journey into 3 stages. Now, some other writers divided into other different stages, okay? We'll talk about a different one too. But the first stage is entering the desert, where you put your senses on alert because you're out of your safety zone. So you really got to pay attention. You have to pay attention when you're fishing, fall out the boat or the wind shift or whatever. So he pays attention, and that's where you start, turning aside and never ceasing to ask, what is this thing? Okay, which is what they said about the manna in the wilderness. What is it? And Abba Pullman said, if Moses had not led his sheep to Midian, he would not have seen him who was in the bush. So you gotta go there. You gotta enter the desert. And then the second part is ascending the mountain, moving beyond senses. Going up the mountain means going into your spirit, going into yourself, and doing that closet cleaning in there. Okay, it involves a practice of contemplation, peering into the mirror of your soul. So Merton has a good way of describing it. He says, we assimilate God's words to us, whether they have come to us exteriorly through teaching of books or in the liturgy or through words of our spiritual director or through experience itself. And that was his big one. You peer into life's experiences, whatever is happening that day that gets your goat or that makes you happy. Peer into that, or just the routine of it. And that's your prayer. Looking into that and seeing God's presence and message in it. Why does it get your goat? And what are you projecting onto it to get your goat? We cannot be true monks if we do not assimilate and make our own the teaching that is given to us from morning to night by God. We meditate formally at times, but this is only to give us the habit of meditation, the habit of seeing beyond the surface of things. So in those times that you're just peering into the problem that you have, or the joy that you have, or the need that you have to understand it, that's practice so you begin to do that more instinctively as you move through the day. So that's monk is. So finding disclosures of God inscribed in your heart. So that's the second step for Gregory. But got a new book. Aren't you glad? Aren't you glad? I was reading it while Diane was drawing down on the plaza Sunday afternoon. And there's another. This writer is talking about the same journey, but instead of 3 stages, he breaks it down into 5. And the first one's the same: heeding the call to go into the wilderness. But he has, for the second one, ascending the mountain or going inward, he has 2 steps. One is doing battle with the demons, projections of your inner junk. It's projected outward. We talked about that on the live stream this morning. So doing battle with the inner demons, that's what happens when you ascend the mountain and go inward. And then he went on about dying to self. You either either give in to the demons and your true self dies, okay? And you follow lesser desires, you never become who you're intended to be in your inner created self. Or you dispel the demons and basically you have no desire left. And he likened it to burning down a rat-infested house to get rid of the rats. Gets rid of the rats, but your house is gone. So when you get all of those desires empty, nothing's left except the true self that emerges and is resurrected. So it's the self that dies. Your false self, by defeating the demons, the true self lives, or you submit to the demons and settle for lesser desires, and your true self dies. So that's just 2 steps into that one. And then Gregory talks about the third step, moving into the cloud. And this is where God goes beyond words. Gregory flails about for an adequate language, variously describing Moses' encounter as luminous darkness, a light so bright that it's dark, a sober inebriation, or a wounding that strangely lights. He just can't describe it. And so the other one, he calls it resurrection. That's where the new life emerges. And you have basically, because you've gotten rid of the desires for comfort, for power, for your own pride, those are all gone. You have a new self resurrected, a purity of heart, sees more of the fullness of God. So that's the kind of spin out that's going on. And then this guy goes on and adds one that's very important that Gregory didn't talk about, is the return home. Okay, and that's where we're going to end up when we do the virtues of the Desert Fathers. It all circles back just like the Christmas sermon, the fourth Sunday of Advent. Going full circle is coming back to love, compassion being expressed for others. It's not a journey if you don't return home. We just left. Okay? And it's got to impact and benefit those that you return to. Your journey is not for yourself, so that you understand more of God and the character of God that you can offer. Hootie, does that make sense? All right. Okay. So now we're going to talk about, we're getting down to, that's kind of their process. It describes their lives and their journey. So now we're going to talk about what they boil it down to. So we're going to talk about, they have a way of saying 3 things are important. 3 things. And it's just kind of we'll talk about why 3. I had a college professor, a Bible professor in college. Anytime we come to 3 of something in a class, doesn't matter what he's talking about, church history or scripture, why 3? Every time. And so we'll talk about why 3. None of the monks say the same 3 things are important. Now, they might have some overlap, but they're not. They might even change what they think is important. Might say 3 different things next time somebody asks them. Does that mean that one is right and the others are wrong? Or does it open us up to the possibility that the ground can shift beneath us during our lives? And what felt essential at one point may not feel so essential now. Or what's essential from your perspective may not be essential for me. Or if 3 different people ask me that, it might depend on who's asking. If my daughters are asking me that, it might be one thing. If we're trying to solve a problem in church, just 3 essential things, it might be something else. If somebody's going through a life transition at another stage of life, it might be 3 different things. So these things are fluid. It's a good way to say it. As we read through the sayings, specifically about 3 essential things, we find several variations of what we must do in life. So this is Christine Walters-Paintner, and she says that she loves that they come in 3s. Why 3? 3 is a number that helps us break through dualities. We tend to view life in either or us, them, or black and white dichotomies. When a 3rd possibility enters, we are invited to hold complexity and the mystery of life and realize that it's much vaster than our dichotomous situation. Okay? So does that sound familiar, Marita? Andrew Root talked about that in the 3, and breaking out of dualities of thinking. We did into that a few summers ago. So we're going to read some sayings of the Desert Fathers, okay? And what we're going to read tonight is there are 3 essential things. You can notice how they are different depending on which Abba is talking.
And who are the Desert Fathers?
Okay, they are 2nd, 3rd century Christians who were basically, there's so much persecution of Christians in the New Testament that the Christian life became defined by the epitome of the Christian life was becoming a martyr. And every Christian in the New Testament expected to die, literally. And when that stopped, they wanted that kind of level of desire to serve God singularly and to die for God, but they weren't going to die as a martyr. So that was the red martyrdom. So they went to the desert as the white martyrs in purity and seeking to suffer and to dispel all their desires and see God only. That's
So
who
they're
they
not
were.
mentioned anywhere in the Bible? though?
No,
These are
no,
just-
no,
okay,
they're-
I see.
their path is described like John the Baptist went into the wilderness, grew up in the wilderness, and he went home to preach about the Messiah who'd come. Elijah, I'm going to talk about him Sunday, being kind of a desert father and seeking solitude and encountering God in the wilderness. The Israelites were wandering in the desert. In fact, I learned something Sunday reading that book down at the plaza. You know what the word Hebrew means? I studied Hebrew 3 years in seminary. But I didn't know what the word Hebrew meant. It means wanderer.
Really?
And I don't think anybody ever told me that. Because I think that's something I would have remembered. Anyway, so that's who they were. And they're going to go, we're going to read some sayings. And so the reading, as we said, was sothesis, or may you be saved, or give us a word. Go out into the desert, disciples, people who wanted to be inspired, enlightened, would go find these dudes and say, give us a word. And then they may or may not answer for days, if ever. You know, they just sat there unmoved. So give us a word. So that was kind of the style of speech, pattern of speech. And they called the Abbas, or the fathers, and Ammas, the mothers, they called them the old man or the old woman, okay, out of respect. Okay. So next time I call you old woman, Carol, it's just respect.
You got it right.
It's like saying sir or ma'am. So who wants to read these? We've got 4 or 5 of them. Rita, thanks. You can be Abba Anthony.
Okay.
Tiffany, you are Abba Andrew. One who? Sandra, you want to read one?
Sure.
I know Nanette doesn't want to, so I'll you. Carol and Jeff can fight over that.
Jeff can have it. Go ahead, Jeff. You got it.
Which one are we?
We'll just do them in order.
Okay.
Marita,
Okay.
you're Abba Anthony.
Someone asked Abba Anthony, what must one do in order to please God? The old man, Abba elder teacher, replied, pay attention to what I tell you. Whoever you may be, always have God before your eyes. Whatever you do, do it according to the testament of the Holy Scriptures. In whatever place you live, do not easily leave it. Keep these 3 precepts and you will be saved.
Okay. So that's kind of one, keep God before your eyes and follow Scripture. That's not, those 2 aren't too surprising, but stay where you are. Because the sayings of the desert say, if you can't find God where you are, you're not going to find God anywhere.
So don't just keep wandering
Don't
around.
keep
looking
wandering
for God.
around looking for greener pastures or going on, the next best deal, or like me, buying the next best book to try to find something. Okay? It's kind of intriguing, not too surprising, but 2 out of 3. The third one we might not ever think of. All right, Abba Andrew.
Abba Andrew said, these 3 things are appropriate for a monk: exile, poverty, and endurance in silence.
Okay, so that's kind of what we know about these cats already. The exile is going into the wilderness. Poverty is their aesthetic lifestyle, and silence. And that's next week's, one of the virtues that we're going to talk about next week, silence, as well as solitude. All right, Benjamin.
As he was dying, Abba Benjamin said to his son's disciples, if you observe the following, you can be saved. Be joyful at all times. Pray without season and give thanks for all things.
That sounds a lot like New Testament, doesn't it? Sounds like Paul. I think we can find all three of those pretty concisely in the epistles of Paul.
That sounds just the opposite of what Andrew said.
Just the opposite, yeah. Yeah, joyful. I wonder what joy looked like for him.
Mhm.
How do you be joyful like that? How do you express joy? They're not going to have birthday cake. They might light a candle, but it was to, something else.
Joy inside,
Mhm.
joyful heart.
And Abba Gregory. Sandra?
Abba Gregory said, "These three things God requires of all baptized: right faith in the heart, truth on the tongue, and temperance in the body."
Okay. So there's a little James in there about the tongue and what you say and watching what you say. There's one of them that says, often I've had to repent of my words. Never have I had to repent of my silence. Think about that, Nanette.
My mouth sometimes gets in my way.
And Abba Pullman, before we read Abba Pullman, this is the this is the sayings. This is the mail from the desert fathers and mothers. Okay, it's what about 250 pages. Okay, they're, like I said before, they're not under any category. They're just alphabetical by the speaker's name. Right, and out of these 250 pages, Abba Pullman sayings attributed to Abba Pullman are 1/7 of the whole book. It's like 300 or something sayings to him alone. Some of these guys have just one thing that they remember to say. That'd be me, And but Abba Pullman, but the way he did it was he had them post a quote from his weekly sermon on Facebook, so they would remember it. So he collected more is attributed to him than many of the others all put together. It seems probable that this was the nucleus out of which the whole book grew. He figures also in many other sayings in the book, and other of the Desert Fathers talk about things he said. It's not certain that all the sayings belong to one Pullman. It might have been more than one Pullman. Okay? Because the name Pullman means shepherd and was also a pretty common title for the teachers, pastor. Okay, so it seems probable that these sayings are from a group of monks following what was known as the devastation or the massacre in the desert, where bandits ran in to kill the Christians and kill the monks. And some of them scattered, and some of them stood there as martyrs, and some of them lived through it and talked about it like Pullman. So what they think happened is this group of monks got together after this devastation. They were afraid. They realized what they had done in the desert was going to die in the desert if they didn't record it somehow. So they got together and started remembering and trying to write down after that massacre the things that had been said, because it was the start of a new age in the desert. That make sense? Anyway, what did Pullman say?
Abba Pullman said, life in the monastery demands three things. The first is humility, the next is obedience, and the third, which sets them in motion, is like a goad in the work of the monastery.
Okay, so humility, obedience, and work. We're going to cover two of those in the virtues as we continue the next sessions. So as we're wrapping up, the Desert Elders do not offer a systematic 10-step program of how to be saved or living a life in the presence of God. Each monk speaks from his or her own experience and offers wisdom earned through their years of practice. Essentially, they say we need to stay committed to our own truth in the moment with the guidance of wise elders and see past dualities that we might worship. Here's Abba Elias, a brother who followed a life of stillness in the monastery of the cave of Abba Saba. That's a good name. Abba Saba came to Abba Elias and said to the brother, in the days of our predecessors, they took great care about 3 virtues: poverty, obedience, and fasting. But among us nowadays, avarice, self-confidence, and great greed have taken charge. Choose you whichever you want most. Don't we all? The virtues are our choice. We're choosing what 3 things are important. What path have you chosen, wanting it most? Reflect on that this week. Look at your paths. If someone asked you for a word regarding essential lessons for living a life of faith, what would be 3 things you say that you've discovered on your path that are essential? Living a life of faith.
You talking about things or events? Or does it matter?
Virtues.
Oh,
What do we tell kids in confirmation, Rita?
Oh, wow.
Important 3, had to boil a confirmation class down into 3 things. They'd love that. 1 a week and we're done. Oh, I've had more time to think about it, but Psalms, morning devotions. Can't remember. Well, there were times in my life when I didn't do it because of schedule and kids. But for the most part, from high school on, that's been an essential element. The other thing is walking. I don't know what would do if I ever stopped walking. I mean, I about lost it when the doctor told me I couldn't have any more bagels. Because my bagel was my time with my Psalms. I didn't, take my bagels away, and what am I going to do? Take my walking away, and I'll be in the same fix. I'll have to readjust my virtues there. Okay? I don't know what the 3rd one would be. Maybe just ministry. Think about what 3 things are important to you. I've had people tell me their 3, or people, and you could identify. I just got a text from Jane. I have to identify 5 of her gifts, her strengths. That's going to be hard, Jane Earnhardt. But what are the cornerstones?
everybody's 3 gifts are going to be different.
They are.
According to what they need to receive.
Yeah.
I
You're
think.
exactly
I
right.
would think so.
What they're created to be, what they're wired for.
Mhm.
What was that? 2019, we did the Lenten study, the Tastes of Worship, everybody has different paths to speak to them about following God. So think about that. What do you want most? What would you say to someone who asks you for a word? What are the 3 essential things? Remember, what may have been essential may no longer make your list. What was once essential may not make your list, and what now stands may be subject to your continuing journey. Yeah, I have to do something beside walk if I can't walk anymore. So In essence, this is our invitation into the desert, to become a monk. Look deeply enough at your life experiences, at the path you want most, and see what is being revealed there about God, about God's story, and your place in it. That's the metaphorical journey into the desert, into our inner selves, who we're created to be. We get in there, we get out of all the gunk, we'll find out who we are, and in purity of heart, we'll see God in there too. Okay, our study will continue with what may or may not be the essentials of the Desert Father spirituality, depending on what Abba or Amma you ask at any given time. Next week, we're going to do session 1 of the Desert Virtues. We're going to combine silence and solitude and work. Work was a surprising one, but it stands as one of the essentials, and there's an abundance of what they say about work, which is good because most of us are constrained by responsibility to work. So it tells us our work can be a part of that path too. Our work and what we do for a living can be a path in the desert, right? That kind of will carry over to monks in the world. That'll be next week. Silence and solitude. And Sunday is on the virtue of silence, and work we'll cover next week. And then the 4th session will be humility and charity, or love, taking it full circle back, going home and giving back, compassion. What do you think about the desert daddies? I think vacationing in the desert sounds a whole lot easier, a whole lot more appealing. Just saying. That gets it. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Good night,
Good
Teresa.
night, Teresa and Barry.
Night, everyone. Thank you.
Night.